Hello and welcome back to Tutor Review. I'm Zach. Alex and I just thought this would be a good opportunity to kind of show one of our hobbies. My hobby is doing a little bit of leatherworking. Actually started selling them too. Just wanted to show you kind of how I make one, the process, and yeah. So first off, you're going to want to come up with your design. If it's something simple, you can see here I made this the front. Couple different pockets that are going to go in there, and then on the back another pocket here. You're going to use these as your template to cut out whatever you need. It's very important to try and get them as close as possible to what you think you're going to need, just because working with the leather afterwards gets a little finicky. As you're cutting off the edges and everything, it's harder to trim things off. You end up having to use one of these guys to sand everything down if you need to. So first off, I'll show you how we get started. Right here, I don't know what exactly the thickness of this leather that I have here, but it's a veg tan leather. You can go to a leather supply store. Typically anywhere that you go is gonna have different thicknesses. Right now I'm just gonna show how to cut everything out first. So big thing first is to actually trace the outline of what you're gonna be cutting. Okay, the main tool for this is gonna be an awl. So this is what you're gonna use to trace the outline of what you're gonna be cutting out. I don't like to trace on this side because it doesn't usually leave a deep enough cut or line for me to really see when I go back to cut it. So I use this side. It's not preferred because sometimes if you screw up on this side, it's gonna be seen in the leather. But let's get started. Where's a good spot? I'm gonna try right down here in the corner. And ideally you'd want something a little bit thicker than this, maybe a piece of wood that you've trimmed into what you need, just so that the edges don't start to get a little bit screwed up. This is just a piece of cardstock that I cut into the shape that I'd like. In the corners, like I said, you want to get them as close as possible as you can, but you can always use something to sand it down later and kind of get more of the shape you want. It's a little harder, but it's not the end of the world. So there's the first part. You see, kind of get a good outline of what we got going here. And what I'm gonna do right off of that, since I already have a straight edge, I'm gonna use the next one right off of that. That way, you only have to do it once on one side. Oops, let me bring this back just a little bit. And as you go, you see you end up pulling the leather a little bit. You got to be careful not to pull those lines out because it does stretch a little. Get that back there again. There's a good little shot there. Now this next spot I'm going to do, since I have the room right at the top of this, and I think I'm going to go like this because it's more of a shared edge, straight all the way down. There's that one. Last piece we got to cut out is this spot with the diagonal on it. So this I'm going to take right to here just so I can get most of that line. You want to try and use as much of the leather as you can so you don't end up wasting too much. And now some people, they'll use scissors to cut these out. I like to use either a ruler or with an actual X-Acto blade just to kind of get an exact feel of what it's going to be. With scissors, sometimes you can cut off more than you mean to. Well, maybe that's just me, but that's kind of how it happens. So right now, I'm going to cut this bit down. Gotta be careful not to go past that. It might take a couple passes. Part of me just really likes how careful you have to be with this. I'm kind of a perfectionist with things like this, although it might not seem like it after I'm done with this, but we'll see. This is kind of a rustic version of what we need. Ideally, I'd be able to see this more from the top, and I'm not doing a good job of that. Yeah, that's fine. I'm gonna have to cut this down a little bit, but. And the thing too, once you get these little lines in with the awl, it's sometimes not so hard just to follow it yourself rather than using anything to go against as a straight edge. It's gonna take going back a little bit more and more. I'll cut back after I got it all cut out. Okay, so I got all my pieces cut out. I did actually end up having to cut another one of these because I forgot that they need to have a backing. I don't know why I always forget that. I guess it's because I only have one of the cards to do both of them. But the next thing I'm gonna do is actually stain these just so that I don't have to stain them once they're all put together. It makes it a little less messy. So let me get something going so we can work on that. Okay, so we got our pieces laid out. You're gonna wanna use some paper towels or something just to make sure you don't get too much of a mess. I got this water stain at Tandy Leather here in close to Seattle. And it's a good option for different colors. You can get whatever different applicator you want. I use just one of these sponges that I actually got there. Probably need to get a new one, but I'm gonna soak this a little bit. And you want it to get soaked in a bit before you actually put it down, because otherwise it makes a little bit darker spots on some of the areas. So get that worked in a little bit. And then here I'm just going to gently circle. Try to give this a nice coating. Of course, you can use different colors. I've got black, I've got light brown. Looks like I'm just gonna end up getting a little bit dirty here. It's okay. Soak it in a little bit more. It's a little slower when you let it soak in, but it's better than having a big old dark spot in the middle. So work it in. You can make it as dark as you want. After it dries, it's gonna look a lot different than when it's wet. You may think, oh wow, that looks a little too much. But then you come back an hour later or however long and it's kind of perfect for what you were looking for. Get all these little light spots out. Okay, that's fine. Move this one over. Try to get this one going a little bit more. So you can see this got a little bit darker, but that's okay. I'll probably use this one as the side with the most pockets. That way you can cover up a little bit of your mistakes. And sometimes I kind of like how it looks even with the extra on there. There's that one. Get into these other few down here. And I am by no means an expert at this. Like, I started this as a hobby and I've just learned more and more as I've gone. There's probably better ways to do some of these things, but this is how I do it. Okay, so that's good. What I'm gonna do is let those dry a little bit, and then we're gonna get to gluing. So you might be thinking, you probably wanna glue these two together first, but the thing with that is we're going to put a stitch through this that helps hold the card up to the right height. And that way it's not seen on the other side of this. So first, we're gonna take a little bit of glue. I'm using this E600 right now. Sometimes I'll just use rubber cement. I've never actually used this one. I know it works pretty well, but what you're gonna wanna do, I always look at this, kind of get an idea of where this thing is gonna sit. And I'll make a little mark with my awl. And then here, you wanna get a little bit of glue all along that edge. Whatever comes out. There you go. And this is really not to hold it together, but it's to keep it in place for when we do the stitching. Alright, so there's a little bit of that. Of course, it's getting everywhere. I'm going to put a little bit on this as well, so it sticks together. Kind of smells like rubber cement, honestly. Some people will, if they really want this to stick, they will scratch these surfaces to make sure that they hold the glue a little bit better. Try to get this as close to where you want it as possible, because then you don't have to do as much shaving down of the sides, which I'm gonna have to do a little bit of, it looks like. I am actually going to look and see where I want to make my mark for the thread to go through. So if I look at this, I want this to sit right about here. So I'm looking at right under there is where I'm going to put that mark. Right around that area there. So what I use for that, you can get these little hole punches that mark out where everything's supposed to go. And I really only need about 4 to go across, because it's just where it's going to stop this from sitting. A little bit higher right there. And I do need this because it'll go through. The rubber cement is a better option if you want an immediate stick that's not going to move around too much. This takes a little while to set up. I'm gonna knock it through. Still not quite through. There you go. Get that through there. For this, you just want to make sure you have enough to go through a couple times, so not gonna need a lot. You can get these different threads at any fabric stores, but this is something I found at a leather goods store as well. And for this to keep it in place, I'm just gonna puncture this part. It's like a waxy thread. Make this go through here. Pull it back over, and that should keep it fairly tight. Now, same thing with the other side. Sorry for how disgusting my fingers look right now, but should have worn gloves. Now the way I'm going to do this, hopefully this stays together. I've never used, like I said, I've never used the E6000 before, and so fingers crossed. But I'm going to get through on both sides, get it even. That way, get it right to about there. And I go over, this one goes through, and out the other side. Pull it nice and tight so it sticks. Go back through. Back around, go through again. Nice and tight. That nice and tight. Come back. This part goes over again. And then, since you're already at the end, you go back a little bit, and this kind of helps keep the stitch in place. So you can kind of flip it around. This is going to go under, this is going to go over. Back through this side. Here, I'm going to clip these. Should be using my other clippers that actually work better on this. Take this, what you do, turn this just enough down to where it starts to get down there, rub it out. That helps it stay in place. So that's the first little spot where you can put a card in. It's gonna sit right down to here. So the next part I'm gonna put on is this part that's gonna cover that stitch. Actually, I'm gonna do this first so they can have a chance to sit together for a while longer. And on this one, since there's not gonna be a pocket in the middle, you can do it all the way across. Fit as best as possible. You can see the edges are a little rough, and I mean, that's okay. I'm gonna have to sand them down anyways, but like I said, try to get them as perfect as you can. Put that together. And usually what I'll do, if I have a lot of time, I'll put some weights on top of these to make them stick together a little bit better. So what I'm gonna do after I put this one on and the one on the back is let them sit under a weight for a little while. So again, almost forgot. See where this is gonna sit? Mark it. So you know where you're going with the glue. I'm gonna let this sit under a weight for a little bit and we'll be right back. So now that this has had some time to dry, it's really time to kind of shape it how you want to make sure these edges aren't as rough. Add in a little bit more glue if you need to. This part right here, I'm gonna leave for right now because I'm hoping that once I use the stitching, it'll close it up a little bit more. One thing you can also do, people like to burnish these edges sometimes, the ones that are not gonna be out on the outside. I don't always do that. I might burnish it just a tiny bit with the edge of this tool and some of my burnishing gum right here. But for right now, I'm gonna leave it. It's something that you can kind of do just to make it a little bit prettier and a little more resistant. But right now, all I'm gonna do is start getting the edges how I want them before I go ahead and stitch it all together. You want the edges to be uniform before you start going, or keep going, because otherwise things can be a little bit off when you're finishing them up a little bit later. You just wanna try and get them to where they're down and even all the way through. So I'm gonna keep going to town on this. And then when you want to get to these corners, it's always nice to round them. I do a motion like this just to get it rounded how I want it to. Go the other way. You can already see it's starting to get a little bit better. So we've really went to town on this, got the edges a little bit nicer. You can see they're still not exactly perfect, but that's okay. We're gonna try and refine that a little bit more in a little bit. But you can see it's starting to get a little more even. All the edges are kind of coming together. And right now, this is where I usually like to take this edging tool, I honestly don't remember what it's called, and take the edges off. Some people like to do this before so they don't have the different color in here, but I actually kind of like that. It gives it more of a rustic look to me, and I'm kind of a sucker for rustic things. But that way, it makes the edges a little smoother when you burnish it. It's a little hard to burnish things that have a sharp edge. They don't want to go together as well. So here I'm just knocking all that off. You can have different amounts that these tools will take off. This one is kind of just the basic one it came with. I don't want anything too crazy anyways. But now this is showing us what we kind of have to work with. The next thing that we're gonna have to do is burnish these edges. And I'm probably gonna do two different things. I'm gonna burnish it a little bit at first. And then once I stitch it, I'm gonna burnish it again. Just not as enthusiastically, I guess you'd say. The reason why is sometimes the burnishing gum will get onto the stitching and it just does not look the prettiest. I think ideally I'd want to burnish it at the end just so I know everything's together and good, but I'm going to start right now. So I've got my burnishing gum, and you can have tools that'll do this for you. People have attachments that'll go to a drill and basically spin fast enough where it makes it really easy to do this burnishing. I do most of my stuff by hand. I've used the machine a little bit, but I just kind of enjoy doing it. But eventually, if I start to do more and more of this, I probably will use the tool more just because it leaves a cleaner edge and it is a little bit easier and less intensive. So you go ahead and put some of this burnishing gum on the sides. And this really helps to just fill in the edges of your work that you're doing. See, you can get a little bit on the edge and it starts to discolor it a little bit, so try not to. Sometimes I'll use a Q-tip or something similar to paint this on without getting it all over. You take this and you just go to town on it. And that's where taking those edges off really helps, because otherwise they get rolled up a little bit. You really want to do this well, because that's what's going to protect your edge and make sure that it doesn't have any issues going forward. And this thing has a few different sizes, so especially on this thick side here, I'm going to use this. When you get down to these other ones, you use a little bit less, and it helps to shape it a little bit more. Okay, I'm gonna finish all these edges and then we'll be right back. So we're done burnishing for now. Eventually we're gonna put some beeswax on these edges to protect them a little bit more. But right now I'm just trying to make sure I close this up enough before we start doing the stitching. So kind of get an idea of where you want your stitches to lie. And this is a good way to mark them as well. It helps keep it the same all the way around. So like for me, I'm gonna do it a little bit more. I want to make sure that this card will still fit in there the right way. But yeah, right about there. And you see it makes a nice little line across this thing. That way it's nice and even all the way around. And you can lay out where your holes are going to be for your stitches. So there you kind of can see the outline of how these stitches are going to lay in there. And it's important to try and make sure you're even all the way around, just for looks and for functionality. If you get too close in, these cards aren't going to go in there. If you too far out, it's just going to look a little funny. So what I do is I go through, I have these different punches. You need to get one of these boards behind it so that it doesn't damage whatever's underneath. But this is when you start laying out how these lines are going to go. And you really need to get it straight up and down so that it doesn't damage anything around it. So it's going to be a little loud, but and this is going to be a little difficult with this. If it's too thick a piece of leather, it's probably better just to go with the less prongs. These hole punches come in different lengths, and you have to make sure that the same width between. See, that went through. And hopefully it doesn't pull your glue out, which it did a little bit there. That way you can go on to the next one and go all the way around. Get to these corners and just try to line it up best as you can to where it kind of makes the corner work in a way for you. There's different sizes, like I said, for these things to punch out. You can get different ones kind of based on what you need. For example, here, I don't want to do this because it's gonna cut off this edge right here. So I would take this and either go right here, make a cut or a hole, and then do another hole here right before, and then start it all over again as I go across. So let me just do that one really quick before I cut away, just so you guys can see. And the ones with less always go through a little bit easier. So then you see with that, it's not really gonna line up exactly how I want. I'm gonna take this and do it a little bit behind. Get through, and then continue on with this. Okay, so now I have all these holes in. You can see I've laid it out fairly symmetrical. You always have to remember on the back side where these things are gonna sit as well. Here, it was a little bit hard to not nick this part, but it's gonna be okay once we put the threads in. I've already gotten this threaded up. You want a lot, just to make sure that you don't run out, because that's one of the worst things you can do is start stitching this and run out at the end. It's not fun. So right now, I'm gonna start on this corner, try to make it even. Get both of these through here. Make sure they go through the same amount. And I'm gonna start doing what I did before. And so this one's gonna come back over. This one's gonna go through. See how far we get with this before. Cut out. The edges got a little damaged with the hammering in for the holes, but that's okay. This is going under. This is coming over the top. And as you run out of string, it'll get a lot easier because you're not gonna have to deal with all these long pieces everywhere. Oh, that hole was not very well through. You want to pull it tight because you don't want it to be too loose after it goes through because it's just going to look a little funky. There's a lot of good tutorials on different ways to stitch these together. This is the one I kind of found works the best for me. Maybe sometime in the future I'll do a little tutorial. I have a little bit better setup, but trying to get these through and tight is the biggest, most important thing to keep these edges together. I'm gonna go ahead and keep working on this, and I will be back with you shortly.
So as we get to the corner, we want to try and finish this up, and then we're eventually going to end up doing that stitching back again, how we talked about, and then closing that off with a little bit of flame and rubbing it out. It's very important to try and make this as tight as possible. You want it to stick together, you want those edges to close up and just get to a point where there's no gaps there in the ends. So as you can see, I'm almost to the corner. Run that through, keeps getting stuck on the corner there. And now this is the point where after this stitch, we're going to start going back the other way to kind of hold these stitches in place. Make it nice and tight. I'm going to go back through where I already stitched to try and close this up. It's a little bit harder to pull through just because there's already a string through there, but it will go through as long as your holes are good. Nice and tight, try to rub those down as much as possible. I think one more should do it. And now we should be able to clip these and burn these down to make them set. There we go. Now the last thing we're going to do is burnish these edges a little bit more again. I'm going to use that same burnishing gum that I did before, and then we're going to put some beeswax on the outside to kind of seal it off completely. So let me get through with the sealing one more time, and I'll get right back. Now you can get beeswax online. It's pretty simple. You get it on Amazon. I like to burn this a little bit before I rub it on just to make sure it gets on there nice and thick. You want to make sure you get enough on here to cover the entire edge, and then we're going to use that burnishing tool again to just rub it in there, make sure it's set along with the form of the edge. Looks pretty good. Keep going over it just to make sure it's nice and smooth and filled in. The edges, you're going to just want to try and make sure it fills in enough to seal up any of those openings that might have come up there with the glue separating a little bit. That stitch is going to hold everything together, but that edge, you still want to try and protect it as much as possible so no moisture gets in there. Okay, now that we have the edges how we want, we're going to start looking at how to do a hole punch here. But first we got to check where the cards are, make sure that they sit in the pockets the right way. Kind of breaks some of that glue up inside as you put these in to try and make sure that they fit the right way. That one's okay because it's low enough where you'll be able to grab the cards above. This back pocket fits in perfectly there. Looks good. And we're going to put a hole punch right there. And that's where our grommet's going to go so that we can put it on a keychain. Now you can typically get these grommet sets online, and they typically come with a hole punch. You just place it where you need it to go, and then once you get in the right spot, you knock it with a hammer to go all the way through. And you'll see that it cuts out a nice little hole there in the leather for your grommet to go. Now you're going to end up putting one part of the grommet on this set piece behind it, and then the leather over top of that with the other part of the grommet on top. And you're going to use the setting tool that comes with the set to place right on top and smack this thing right into place. It'll hold it right there once it gets a few good smacks. Now you can see on both sides it's set pretty well, and that's pretty much your finished product. You can fit your cards in there. You can see that the hole is in the right spot to where you can fit a keychain through there and not have any issues. There's a lot of simple things to make out of leather, whether it's a little wallet or a card holder. It's really fun, and I just love doing it. If you're interested in buying one of these, go to my store on Etsy. I'll put the link below. But thanks for your time, and like and subscribe, and look forward to more videos from Alex and I, whether it's leatherworking or going on trips. We're trying to find more things to review that people like, and we appreciate all the support. So thank you for sticking around. This was 2 to Review, and have a good day.
What is that?